Great. Yeah, thanks, Maura, and great to see you all. Really looking forward to this discussion today, and really excited about this call because it's a real chance to look at one of our core priorities, which is expanding equitable access to the outdoors. In past calls, we have focused, we try and focus on one of our big priorities for each of these calls. We have focused on the big connected network of landscapes that we're working to protect across the country as part of a 30 by 30 effort. We've done actually a couple calls on how to make public lands part of the climate solution with our work on preserving forest carbon and mature and old growth forests across the country. And we have exciting progress actually on that with the Biden administration having announced that goal. So we're helping them with that, as well as with trying to transition away from fossil fuels into clean energy on public lands, which has its challenges. But today we're really excited about really focusing on our work to expand access to the outdoors. And if the pandemic has shown us one thing, it's just, and everybody on this call knows this so well, but it's just how important green space is for our resiliency and our health and well-being and our ability to thrive. And we really feel strongly that everyone deserves a right to access to the outdoors for a healthy life. And as we all know, it also helps build and broaden a powerful conservation movement to achieve good conservation outcomes and good environmental policy writ large. But in our increasingly urban nation, we've become woefully disconnected to nature, and even more significantly, there are dramatic inequities in who has access to the outdoors and who does not. More than a third of our population cannot even walk to a local park or face other significant barriers of getting into nature. Many communities lack parks and green spaces, especially in areas that have been historically affected by discriminatory housing policies and lack of green infrastructure. And as we see in so many areas throughout our society, these barriers disproportionately impact people who have low incomes, as well as Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. Now, if you look at any map of any city that shows both demographics as well as a green space, it's pretty astounding, as we have done really looking at this data across the country, and where you see tree canopy cover in local parks is predominantly in the wealthier communities. You look at an aerial view of Washington, D.C., Northwest D.C. is green, Southeast D.C. looks like cement. I mean, the aerials are dramatic. And this is really why we started the Urban to Wild program initially in a few key cities to help build more equitable distribution of parks and to achieve more welcoming and easy access to them for all demographics. And learning from this work has really been important to us. Our strength as an organization is we're local national. We can't work everywhere, but we work in places to deliver great outcomes locally and then use what we learn to influence the national policy that we advocate for. And we've been advocating for some really important bills that expand funding for equitable access to the outdoors that would be available for all communities around the country. So it's really this local national work that we're doing with Urban to Wild that I think is the real power of what we can deliver as an organization. But with Bill Meadows on the call, I just want to give a shout out, because this work really, our Urban to Wild program, it really kind of grew itself, and it really grew out of an effort that he launched with our California program and our Los Angeles team about 12 years ago, where we helped a diverse coalition in Eastern LA protect the San Gabriel Mountains and also create a string of connected parks along the San Gabriel River from mountains all the way out to the sea, an effort that we're still working on. And our team is now expanding upon that work in the Southern California mountains which is the focus of the call today. So leading that conversation will be two of our really terrific staff, both long-term and newer staff, Daniel Rossman and Sharon Musa. I think many of you may know Daniel because in fact, he's the first person that we hired in Los Angeles 13 years ago. And the partnership I was talking about, he was instrumental in building and actually co-leading that partnership, the San Gabriel's Forever Coalition, which ultimately led to President Obama designating the San Gabriel's National Monument in 2014. And a lot of subsequent work has expanded upon that. His work has since expanded to the as a landscape director for our broader work in the Southern California mountains landscape that he'll talk about today. And he has been serving as California's deputy director. And we have Dan Smuts on the phone, who's our California director as well. Now, Sharon, she joined our team 2 years ago as a fellow for our government relations team here in Washington, D.C., where she was playing a key role in our national equitable access campaign and really advancing some of the national legislation I was talking about, transit to trails, outdoors for all, and other programs that are creating funding for local parks. In October 2021, she joined our Urban to Wild team in Los Angeles, where now she's working to expand access in LA County. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel and Sharon. And if you have questions, you could stop us throughout, but we're also going to take time kind of once we get through telling the story to have some time for questions and discussion. So Daniel.
Thanks. I'm going to set the backdrop for this conversation, talking about the landscape, and then pass it off to Sharon. But the Southern California mountains landscape was selected as a top priority for the Wilderness Society because it offers an incredible opportunity to preserve species in the face of a changing climate and incredible growing population on our path to preserve 30% of lands and waters by the year 2030, and to really drive home this opportunity to ensure people benefit equitably from public lands. It's also a place where we've got a long record of success and strong partnerships. So here's a quick highlight tour of the region. The Wilderness Society, along with our partners, has a track record of success in the region dating back to the original 1964 Wilderness Act, and as recent as 2 national monument designations under the Obama administration. And on the park funding front, securing almost $100 million annually appropriated for new parks in LA County by working on a local ballot measure. But our work is not done. Only 30%, or 1.2 million acres, is protected at that highest form of protection, shown here on this map in dark green. So this is the existing protected core. And that presents an opportunity to add to these areas, connecting corridors for wildlife and creating this landscapes conservation approach that preserves critical wildlife linkages and the large ecological network beyond just isolated islands of wilderness, which is so important. The Southern California mountains landscape is made up of these very young, steep mountains on the geological timescale young, and covered with chaparral, montane forests, sitting in this rare Mediterranean climate that's only one of 5 Mediterranean climate zones in the world, that stretches from Santa Barbara County to San Diego. Today, 75% of this landscape is federally managed, primarily across 4 national forests, the Los Padres, Angeles, San Bernardino, and Cleveland. But the geology really creates this incredibly rich biodiversity. It's within the California Floristic Province, which is a world biodiversity hotspot. And according to scientific analysis, this landscape is the #1 place nationally for protecting species of conservation concern, those most at risk of extinction. It is an incredibly important place to work to address the extinction crisis and loss of wild nature, by working to secure this resilient, connected landscape on our path to 30 by 30. It's also a place where we see a lot of people. Native American and indigenous peoples have stewarded the landscape since time immemorial. It's the ancestral home of the Chumash, Serrano, Tongva, Losueño, Cahuilla, Kumeyaay peoples, among others. And these lands remain home to approximately 50 tribes, bands, and groups. The Southern California megapolis is home to more than 22 million people. Let's put that another way. 6.6% of the US population, or even another way, 1 in 15 people living in the United States is adjacent to this landscape. So this is really important for 2 reasons. One, it demonstrates the urgent need to continue to preserve in the face of this rapidly growing population so that we ensure people exist in balance with nature. And what excites me most is the opportunity we have to engage more people in enjoying and protecting nature. The population is not only large, but it is racially and culturally diverse, providing a valuable opportunity to strengthen engagement with large Latino, Black, Asian, Native American communities, and other communities of color to ensure our movement is more inclusive of the full diversity of the nation as we work to make sure that all people benefit equitably from public lands.
Daniel?
Yeah.
Oh, can you just say, before you move on, just say a little bit about the contribution of state protected lands versus federal? I mean, because we're so accustomed to working at the federal lands exclusively for, lo these many decades. And here you have a situation where there's quite a substantial state protected area system, I think.
Yeah, what is exciting about the landscape scale approach is that it's pushing us to look at the ecoregion as a whole and how can we use all the tools in the toolbox to provide this connected core. And in the case of Southern California in particular, actually as a result of the Hidalgo Treaty after the Spanish-Mexican War, we signed a treaty that said the federal government actually can't acquire certain lands within Southern California. And so you have this really rich patchwork of state lands, of private lands, of locally conserved lands that are being stitched together to create this connected core throughout the landscape. And I think the other thing that's really striking is in those private landscapes is this really incredibly urbanized communities. And we're actually going to share a video that tells a little bit of the story about why it's so important to protect nearby nature.
Thank you.
The mountains are in our backyard. They're not just a beautiful background. It's definitely healing for myself, and I know other people use it for that. And so losing that access, where are we gonna go? My name is Nancy, and I am from Pasadena. I know that it was stressful financially for my parents. Being really little, I just knew like this is uncomfortable. My dad was always on the road, and my mom, she was only 23 with 4 kids. When you're actually in a new country and you don't know the language and you're trying your best and you're dealing with depression and anxiety, and that was stressful. A lot of LA is traffic. You have somewhere to go. You have to hustle, you have to make money. You're not getting anywhere without going on a freeway. Nature was the complete opposite. It was freedom and peace. experience out in the wilderness. I must have been 8. Some organization somewhere took us out to the wilderness. You got to just explore. Like, I don't remember adults ever telling us not to do something. You could like touch and run around and be kids and free. Every month we got to go. So that symbolized an escape. When I look up at the mountains, I always feel really small. Anything that I'm struggling with, anything that I'm worried about, it feels really small. You're in awe and you remember to appreciate things, and it kind of brings you back. It brings me back to realizing that you can work through things, it's fine, it'll be okay. And so that's why it's so powerful to be in nature and to get that sense of calmness. If I didn't have the wilderness, I can't even imagine where I would find a place to feel safe or feel peacefulness. There's no other experience like it when you're sitting on top of a mountain. To have nature be sold and people lose access, I think, is a huge injustice. You would lose a lot. You would lose young children being able to experience nature for the first time. You would lose a place of healing for a lot of people. You would lose the beauty of being able to feel so small.
As President Obama said when designating the San Gabriel Mountains National Monument, this is an issue of social justice, because it's not enough to have this natural wonder within your site. You need to be able to access it. And so we are continuing to make good on that promise. Right now, we're working with the San Gabriel Mountains Community Collaborative to help shape a visitor plan for the National Monument. And we're working in partnership with community-based organizations where we've learned a great deal about how the Wilderness Society can partner with community-led organizations to provide access to nearby wildlands and ensure everyone has a place to play close to home. These relationships and the impact we've been able to achieve in support of community-led conservation form the basis of our Urban to Wild program, the program that my colleague Sharon Musa leads here in LA County. So let me pass it off to her.
Thank you, Daniel. Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Musa, and as Jamie introduced, I'm the Urban to Wild specialist for Los Angeles. Urban to Wild focuses on solving 2 problems: how to get people to nature and how to get nature to people. So as Nancy pointed out in the video, much of Southern California is freeways, not only cutting off people's access to nature, but highlighting how much individuals' cars are the main ways that people access any location in this landscape. So what do you do if you can't afford a car, or a major concern right now, can't afford to spend extra on gas, or maybe you're too young to drive and want to access the beautiful landscape around you? One major component of ensuring equitable access to the outdoors is providing ways for people to get out of the city to the surrounding wildlands through public transportation. And here's what that looks like in LA County. This map of colorful intersecting lines on the left shows metro rails converging in downtown LA. Now the yellow line heads east towards the San Gabriel Mountains, but doesn't quite actually reach into the National Monument or any of the trailheads. TWS and local partners have worked with community groups to identify the best routes of access and assisted in persuading county transportation officials to create new bus routes, the squiggly blue lines heading northward from the Metro Rail 5 to 10 miles into the San Gabriel Mountains. The pilot transportation programs that we are leading here in LA County can and should serve as a model for how other municipalities can expand their local green spaces, and even for federal legislation. For example, Transit the Trails Act, which, as Jamie pointed out, I worked on when I was a GR fellow, which was introduced in the House by Jimmy Gomez, who represents East LA and downtown, would provide funding to expand public transportation links to parks within cities and to nearby wildlands across the country with a specific eye to underserved communities. thereby allowing other communities to build out similar public transportation routes based on the needs and natural resources in their area. If you could take me to the next slide. The other vital component of Urban to Wild is, of course, bringing parks and green spaces to the communities of greatest needs. Next slide, please. Now, this map of LA County shows the areas with the greatest needs for parks in red and orange. These areas are very densely populated, predominantly by people of color, and these areas have very little tree cover or green space of any kind, as well as lots of industry. As a result, people living in these areas not only lack access to nature, but they are exposed to high levels of air pollution, leading to poor health outcomes overall. CalEnviroScreen, a mapping tool that helps identify California communities that are most affected by many sources of pollution and where people are often especially vulnerable to pollution's effects, demonstrates that for many communities of color, especially Latinx communities, African American communities, Pacific Islanders as well, there's a tendency to live in geographic areas with higher pollution burdens and vulnerabilities than other racial and ethnic groups analyzed. In fact, according to a study reported in The Guardian, Latinx people and African American communities tend to breathe on average 40% more pollutants than their white counterparts across the state. Maps showing indicators of community well-being, including employment rates, income levels, household assets, public investment in education and educational attainment, as well as access to healthcare, exposure to violence, and so on and so forth, look pretty much the same as this map. This is not a matter of chance, and it's the result of generations of policies and decisions that have shifted public investment to wealthier and predominantly white communities. Policies like redlining identified quote unquote less desirable neighborhoods, often coinciding with areas of high minority or foreign-born populations, and then denied equitable personal and community access to financial services and investments or public goods like libraries, hospitals, and relevant to our work, parks and outdoor spaces to these neighborhoods. These are not neutral spaces or choices. They often come from a very specific history that has ramifications on people's lived experiences today and highlights the needs for making very different policy choices going forward. Now, some of the ways that TWS is working in supporting the ongoing community work includes ensuring that equity and indigenous perspectives are incorporated into California's 30 by 30 state level initiative, which Daniel brought up. One of the first, and I'd like to point out that California is one of the first states to have its own 30 by 30 initiative. So beyond that, TWS is also supporting state and county budget advocacy and education for community members, supporting California Natural Resource Agency's Outdoor Access for All initiative, which would fund programs to expand equitable access at state parks, creating new parks close to underserved communities, like the Emerald Necklace Plan, an internet-connected loop of parks and greenways along our urban waterways nestled in the heart of the San Gabriel Valley and extending from the San Gabriel Mountains and the Angeles National Forest down to the Pacific Ocean. We are also connecting local parks departments to state and federal park funding dollars and thinking creatively about how to build funding sources that cover both capital investment and acquisition for new parks, as well as maintenance and programming to maintain these parks for the long term. The biggest part of our work is simply listening and uplifting existing advocacy and programming, as well as sharing TWS's power and access with these community-based organizations. Big green conservation groups like ours must actively pivot to working with and for everyone, not just the traditional conservationists. Recognize that communities of color have historically aligned with conservation goals. However, that is changing these days as many of these communities fail to see the return on their political investments in their own communities. We can only create future environmentalists and stewards of the earth by allowing people to see for themselves how vital of a resource the nature around them can be for their community and for themselves as individuals.
All right, so thanks so much, Daniel and Sharon. With that, let's open it up to questions. That was a lot to cover on our work in Southern California. Yeah, Brenda.
Moira? Yeah, maybe for Sharon, I guess. Can you talk a little bit more about the privatization? What exactly that means for you in Southern California and what is happening What are the threats?
In terms of privatization of land,
Yes, who's doing it? I mean, you mentioned that it was, you know, an urbanized land. I think, yeah.
yeah, Daniel also might be able to hop in. on
Okay,
this
great.
comes
Whoever.
to that. But one of the major concerns, and actually this came up a lot in our retreat recently, is that much of the landscape is being sold to developers. So oftentimes these places that have a lot of biodiversity potential and are just beautiful landscapes, as all of us recognize, are being sold to either be factory or industry locations. And of course, much of it is being turned into housing, some freeway creation, et cetera. So all of these contribute to decreasing the amount of natural and conserved wildlands in Southern California. But as was pointed out in the video and Nancy kind of highlighted, just the creation of different freeways and highways that bisect the community and remove them physically from the mountains and the wildlands around them are another way that people's access is continually threatened. And Daniel, I'll also let you respond to that if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think you covered it well. Like, despite what the
Yeah.
headlines say about Californians moving to other states like Texas, we still have a housing shortage, and there are actually requirements to build more homes. And instead of seeing more dense housing development, we're continuing to see sprawl. And so the opportunities to acquire lands and set them aside for parks is, you know, a ticking clock.
Wow. So it's obviously these aren't protected lands, they're privately owned lands, the ones that are being developed at this rapid clip. Not federal, and they're not
Correct.
selling off
Yeah.
state land.
You know, there's secondary effects like increasing demands for power line corridors or other energy development, or even the fact that many of the places are, you know, in these Rocky Mountains, you know, mined for gravel building materials, right? That's all sort of related to the system. But yeah, I think what we're really looking at is, and what's exciting about the Urban to Wild program funding is also reconverting lands. So the state parks is recently celebrating opening up a former rail yard to add to a system of state parks, a bow tie park, which will be in downtown LA.
Huh. Thanks. I've said this, but all three presentations were outstanding, especially the young woman walking in the woods. Oh.
Looks like Marcia has a question.
Marcia, yeah.
Marcia, sorry.
Yeah, and this, I don't know, probably is to Sharon. The map that you showed that has the areas most in need of parks, I would assume that those are probably pretty densely developed. And I just wonder, what kind of spaces do you look for, or what kind of spaces do you find that can be transitioned into a park-like area without blowing it up?
That's a good question. Well, one of the, I feel like, main types of land that people are converting these days is one that Daniel already mentioned. There are a few parks that we have, or that the Wilderness Society has worked on in partnership with other organizations that used to be former quarry mines and other sources of industry. And communities have lobbied for those mines to be shut down and for that land to be transitioned into something else. And this takes a long time, but it is a good way for people to kind of reimagine this space and both mitigate the air pollution effects of those mines in their community, as well as create benefits of like reducing heat islands, creating better climate effects in their area. So just rethinking those spaces that may exist in a way that is not beneficial to the community already. And often, as of now, even though those areas in the red, much of which are in downtown LA and in inner city LA, are highly developed, many of these plots of land are also abandoned. So no one is using them really, and they're not being managed or conserved. They're just kind of like empty land that is not benefiting the community and is not really being used even to help a developer. So also reimagining how we can use these empty spaces to benefit the community, even to create small parks that people can access close to home. Robin?
Does the California 30 by 30 initiative include funds for procuring these lands? So if you had your eye on a parcel, how do you act?
Yeah, that is definitely a big complication. Daniel and I have been participating in 30 by 30 discussions recently, and the draft pathway document came out late last year, early this year. And one of the major concerns is that a lot of the funds are not being directed to these communities of highest need, who might be using those acquisition dollars in the same way that I was mentioning to Marcia, to acquire land that's either abandoned or to acquire land that's being used for development currently. So there is a lot of debate actually right now about how to leverage those funds. And in fact, I was recently in conversation with Parks and Rec department staff from LA County. And one of the questions that I had for them is, do they feel like they can access these state dollars either from Access for All initiative or from 30 by 30? And they mentioned that one of the difficulties for them is that they are only allowed to use these fundings for capital investments. So they might be able to acquire a plot of land, but it doesn't actually allow them to maintain this plot of land and maintain a park for the future. So there are a few complications when it comes to connecting the state and federal funding opportunities to the local community's needs.
Thank you.
You might just add again, the success you all have had in local funding for equitable access, because it's pretty significant, over 100 million, correct, in LA County.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and just recently, one of our partners, LA Nature for All, got a grant for $1 million to support our Transit to Trails funding initiative and to build out the public transportation lines into the San Gabriel Mountains.
And those dollars also, we're looking to drive towards our other national policies, like the National Recreation Area that Jamie touched on, building recreational access along the San Gabriel and Rio Hondo River corridors. There's real opportunities to re-envision these linear parks that travel along the river, creating more shaded and joyful places to recreate for communities with this connected green linkage.
All right, any further questions?
Yeah, who are the most important partners for us? I mean, I understand local groups, but are there some standouts, and why is that?
Definitely. Amongst the local groups, LA Nature for All, who I mentioned we work with on our Transit to Trails initiative, has been a major partner, not only for the recent Transit to Trails initiative, but we also used to partner with them in funding their Youth Leadership Academy. So we've been working with them for quite some time. We also sit in on a number of different coalitions here in LA County. I participate in a Park Equity Alliance, which includes a variety of different community-based organizations who work more so on getting parks access to people closer to home in LA County. And these communities are all over LA. We have some people who are in Southeast LA, we have some people who are in the San Fernando Valley, we have some people who are further east into Boyle Heights, etc. And Daniel and I both sit in on a coalition called the San Gabriel Mountains Community Collaborative, which is more so helping to connect people to the larger wildlands and to the San Gabriel Mountains. So taking them outside of the city of LA. And LA Nature for All is one of our partners there, as well as the National Forest Service and National Forest Foundation. And we've also been working historically with Amigos de los Rios. They have been working with us on the Emerald Necklace Plan, which is the series of parks leading from the Angeles National Forest and San Gabriel Mountains out to the Pacific Ocean. So there are definitely a lot of different players in this space. And I would say, Daniel, I don't know if there's any that you also want to give a shout out to.
Yeah, I think you covered the big umbrella groups, and you should also mention your engagement with the Parks Now Coalition at the statewide level that helped pass a statewide funding bond for supporting state parks, and continues to engage on park access and equity issues statewide.
All right, so thank you so much, Daniel and Sharon. I feel like it's just a little teaser almost of such rich and deep work that is happening in Southern California. So thank you. Let's go back to Jamie just to hear sort of the bigger picture on urban to wild work.
Yeah, I mean, this has been really inspiring work for my time here at the Wilderness Society, because I think a lot of us have come from a background of protecting remote big wild places, and yet understanding how important this local and urban work is. So we've really learned from this work in Los Angeles. We built the principles of urban to wild to think about how could we add value in other communities, and so we have a great program going in Seattle now with similar kinds of programs on public transportation and mapping to understand where we need new open space for communities and neighborhoods that need it the most, just like Sharon talked about. Albuquerque as well, exciting effort there. And now we're looking to expand into 2 other places. We're looking at a couple of cities here in the East where we think we could really add value to local efforts. And, we look for a couple of things, obviously, where we can really add value with this kind of work and our skill set to make a difference locally, but also to work with different types of communities so that we can, that have different challenges. Every community is unique, so that we can continue to build our learning about what cities and communities really need, so that, again, we can really inform our national policy work to support all communities and expanding these opportunities. I will say there's a movement growing around this equitable. I mean, I think we've all been part of open space funds, right? Ballot measures that have been incredibly successful all over the country for open space. Only recently have folks started to look at equitable park equity funds, and it really started with this LA County fund, but then New Mexico passed a park equity fund a few years back, and then just last year Colorado passed one, and with incredible bipartisan support. The whole thing came together in about 3 months, and it's allocating a part of Great Outdoors Colorado funding for equitable. I mean, think about it. It was over 100 years ago the first kind of wilderness area was set up in Colorado, but it's not until now, 120 years later or 100 years later, that states are starting to think about, oh yeah, where's our money? Who's getting access, who isn't? And so we're really working to expand this equitable access funding, and at a state level as well as a national level, and no matter who's in office at the presidential level, we can always make progress at the state level. In fact, when we got this county funding initially in LA, it was while Trump was president. So this is also an area we can continue to make great progress, no matter kind of what we're dealing with at a federal level. Obviously, we have great opportunities with the Biden administration right now. So so that's really, what we're doing, the hope and promise of the program and the work. As Sharon said so well, we're trying to bring more people to nature and more nature to people. and do that in a way that builds a broader, more inclusive movement that ultimately is critical to our long-term success for all of the things that we're trying to achieve. So thanks for everyone for joining this call.
Jamie,
Yeah,
it's Bill. Can I just say one word before you close?
yeah, please do. I just closed, but now go ahead.
You hadn't adjourned us yet, so.
Okay.
First of all, this is just super work, and I look at Brenda, and I remember conversations we had. I think this is part of the reason that we decided to have our first governing council meeting in Los Angeles about 2003 or 4, I think. And I remember my first hike into the San Gabriels that weekend. And so, and we were just thinking about life in Los Angeles at the time. And then Daniel came along and helped start a program that has really, I think, blossomed. And I am so pleased with what the Wilderness Society has done in taking an idea and turning it into a great success. And I think, engaging a broad public, the values that we're espousing now are a little bit different, broader, better, I think, than the narrow views that we had 15 years ago. But I am so pleased with the results of this, and you guys have done a fabulous job. And I'm proud that I had a finger in the beginning of it, but there are lots of hands that have taken over and just really had success. So thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, really appreciate that coming from you, especially.
Do we have time for any more questions?
Go ahead. Yeah.
First, I just want to say, Bill, I mean, you always were looking way ahead, and this is just one example of where your own thinking really helped shape Daniel's program and the whole program. But I wanted to ask one more question about, it was the woman Nancy who was walking on the trails in the San Gabriels. Yeah, I just wondered about safety, and maybe it's just the mood from the last few weeks, but there she was alone in, hypothetically walking in San Gabriels. And how is that? I mean, I don't know anything about crime rates in Los Angeles or bordering areas, but don't mean to be a big downer, but is it, possible to go walking alone?
Yeah,
just jump all over that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important and complicated question, and certainly, there's a lived experience for Nancy that I don't share as a white guy hiking alone. But I will say that's one of the things that we're trying to drive resources to is making the places safe and welcoming.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sometimes it's as simple as like ensuring that there's better signage so folks are actually walking in the right place. We're dealing with challenges where people are going on these sort of user created trails that are very dangerous, and know a story of a young valedictorian of her high school who passed away the summer after she graduated. It's really tragic, and due to real lack of information about where to go on some of these trails, which is part of what I think the recreation area will address. And part of this story about these funds need to make the places welcoming and safe through engaging visitors. We've had real success with a model program that hired young multilingual outreach personnel on the San Gabriel River who did things like just said, hey, can you take out your trash? It's not going to decompose for 50 years. But also it was just nice to have people that, particularly for the forest, you go up there and usually your only interaction with someone is, somebody with a badge who's giving parking tickets. Like if you see someone working on the forest. So we're trying to fund these programs that will help provide more interpretation and engagement. And that's part of this plan we're working on with the community collaborative so that you have more presence and it creates a safe environment. But I will say, the mountains are one of those few places in Los Angeles, maybe next to Dodger Stadium or the Pantry Diner in downtown LA, where you can get this incredible cross section of peoples. So you'll have the mayor hiking along with a Latino multi-generational family, with a Korean grandmother, with the full milieu of LA society. And I think that's one of the special things
That's
about
wonderful.
these wild places that are important to preserve.
Yeah, great,
Just-
great.
Ray here. Brenda, I'm glad you brought
Hi.
that up, because that was one of the things that crossed my mind when I saw the video, which I thought was wonderful, very inspiring. Not only the real issue of safety, but also the perception of safety,
Mhm.
urban dwellers of going into the wilderness. And I can see that being one of the obstacles, in addition to the physical obstacle of getting there, but the mental, emotional obstacle of children that are raised in such controlled environments and have never really played outside in a green wild space, and how we overcome that perception of danger as well as any real danger is part of the, I'm sure, part of the outreach program.
Yeah. Right.
I would say, especially with working with partners who do run programs, a lot of it, as they've told me, is working in increments. You don't take out like a kid who's been in the inner city and hasn't experienced nature intensely out for like a week-long camping trip on their first time. You take them out for an afternoon walk so they can see a trail and get used to the idea of being out there. Because like you said, Ray, a lot of it is just the perception of where you feel welcome and where you think that you should be. So yeah, you start small, take them out for an afternoon walk, take them for a hike, show them that they should be in this space and they belong to be in this space. Eventually, you might be able to work up to them actually going camping or being out in wilderness, like recreating and being comfortable, even being there by themselves, taking their own family out on trips, et cetera, et cetera. But it all is very incremental work.
Mhm.
That's a good answer. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, really, really good discussion and really key to all of this. So if you have any additional thoughts, feel free to follow up with Sharon or Daniel or Maura or myself, and because we want to continue to build upon this really, really outstanding work. And yeah, it's just really exciting, and also helping partners and others to do this work, even when we're not going to be the primary deliverer of the work. But I think we can also work with a lot of other partners. There's a lot of replicability here, so that the impact is really exciting. So thanks again, everybody. We want to be respectful of your time. So we're all done. Unless Maura, is there anything you?
No, I think that's a wrap. But yeah, please feel free to reach out with any other questions, comments, ideas.
I thought that was just marvelous, really inspiring.
I really enjoyed it. I had no idea that the
Yeah.
Wilderness Society was active in this sphere, and it's really exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.